My Inner Knowing, empowering you to find your compass for the journey. We are dedicated to supporting you to rediscover and trust your natural ability to navigate life each day by sharing insight and experience through the lens of two professional communicators and their guests. We intend to prompt internal inquiry that supports all those willing to explore a unique path.
Well, good morning, Maryann. How are you?
I am very well. How are you?
Yeah, good. Really good today. We're glad to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So, we've mentioned that we jump right in. So,
Yes.
very curious for you at this point in your life, how would you describe what your inner knowing is? What does it feel like? How do you know if you're there or not there?
Well, I would say it's wonderful
Mm,
because to me, it's an inner calm. It's also an inner sense of confidence with that calm. So it's unlike, I would say, the more nasty definition of ego. So it's more of a calm confidence, being comfortable in your own skin, um, being comfortable, I'll say, outside of your skin, being connected as well.
mm. For you, when did you notice that it was even a thing, this inner sense of knowing?
Well, I'm going to give it a two-part answer. The one part answer is that I would say more recently in my life, I became aware of it probably around 10 years ago, more consciously aware. And then when I became more consciously aware around 10 years ago, then I looked back and realized, oh, that's what was happening at certain key
Mm,
points in my life. But I didn't really recognize it then as intuition or being connected or being more purposefully guided
mm,
in that sense. So I would say that my retrospective later in life gave me a perspective more as
Mm.
to what was going on.
yeah, yeah. What do you think brought it to your attention so much more clearly?
Well, it was a one of those typical days. I was just out getting the mail, and my neighbor across the street, who was in a very similar career as I was, very fact-based, etc. And she had mentioned that she thought she was going to a yoga class, but instead some spirit medium was there, and she didn't feel like just driving back home, so she stayed. And she was absolutely dumbfounded at how accurate this person was. And I really
Mm.
never gave all of that much thought. But since she was so intrigued, and she's a hard person to really intrigue, I thought, well, let me just go and check this out. So I went and I checked it out. And this particular medium told me things about myself that were never written down, only I would know. And I was really shocked. And
Mm.
so I went back, and a few more sessions later, he said to me, you know, you can do this, right? And I was like, what? And so
Mm.
he said, "Do you want to see?" I said, "Sure." And so he put three pictures down in front of me, very nondescript pictures, nothing special about them, people I'd never seen before. And he said, "What are you getting about this particular picture?" We went one after another. And it was really like I was wondering who was speaking because all this information started to flow. This man had spent his career in World War II in the Navy. He fixed airplane engines of airplanes on aircraft carriers, and I went on and on and on. And he had two marriages, and then he died of respiratory failure in Florida, et cetera, et cetera. And as I continue, and as I'm talking, I'm wondering who is talking, and it is
Mm.
me,
Mm.
but I'm wondering where is this information coming from? And then he put another picture down in front of me, and a similar thing happened. And I said, "Oh, you know, this gentleman didn't think very highly of himself. He could have gone on for higher education, but he didn't have a lot of confidence. But he taught a specialized subject to children out of his home, two-story home, et cetera, et cetera." And he said, "Well, that's right." He says, "Actually, that was my uncle, and he taught music to children out of his home." And the first picture, by the way, ended up being his father-in-law, who was in World War II and was in the Navy and did fix engines of planes on aircraft carriers. And then
Wow.
the third picture he put down, a similar thing happened. I said, oh, this young gentleman is really suffering. And I paused. I said, but I really can't tell if he's here or crossed over. And that was because he was in a drug-induced coma. So
Oh
that's
my.
kind of why he felt a little fuzzy to me, whether he was in or he was out. So that's when my awareness really, I got kind of jolted into it in that way. So that's what first happened.
Wow. Wow.
Had you always been, intuitive, just had a sense of things, or just had never really noticed until that point?
Well, I chalked it up to the fact that I would perceive information. I really had chalked it up to the fact that I was grateful that I was born with some good brain cells,
Hmm.
and I really studied hard and I really worked hard. Uh,
Mm.
and so I really chalked it up to that. But again, when I looked back, and I had started out as an X-ray technician out of high school because for family reasons I really couldn't go to college right away as planned, and I would perceive what was going on with the patient before I got further information, say from the more educated sources
Right.
that were taking care. And I just thought, oh well, that was just a perception that I had, but I didn't really put a lot of value on it per se. Then, as I proceeded in my business corporate career, then things really did start to kind of get my attention. But again, in my business career, I was always going at such a pace, I really didn't stop to figure it out. For example, I had a gentleman that was sitting in front of me. He worked for me at the time, and it was his first day back from paternity leave. It was his first child. And as he sits down in front of me, I'm feeling that something is definitely going awry with his wife's, I'll just say, lower anatomy
Mhm.
after the birth. And of course, this is a very awkward thing to talk about, and against all the HR rules and everything. So I said to him, how are you? And he says, oh, doing good. How's the baby? Doing well. And I said, how's your wife feeling? And he just paused and he kind of went like that, like, oh, almost like he was in pain.
Mm.
And so I said, well, yeah, I didn't really have anything planned for you to do today. It's your first day back. So why don't you just go home and check on her and get her to the doctor if that's what needs to happen, and call me later tonight and let me know if you can come in tomorrow. And if you can't, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. And so he called me later that night and he said, oh, the doctor said it's really good that I got her there, that she was all infected.
Mm.
So things like that were happening.
Yeah.
And where, again, something just told me I need to say to this gentleman in a very professional manner, maybe you really should go back home and check on things. But there was a variety of those types of situations that kept happening, whether it
Mm.
was health related or something else related. And again, because of the pace of the workplace, I really didn't stop to really think about it a whole lot.
Mhm. Mhm. Sure. I could see that when we walk in the world that way and it's what we experience, we may not recognize that other people don't have similar experiences.
Yeah, I just, it was just another thing to handle through the day, to show some compassion to this young dad coming back from his first day.
Yeah.
And I just moved on with the rest of my day.
Right. Right.
Could you take us back to this? You're sitting with this medium, um, and he says, you can do this too.
Hmm.
Was that a knowing on his part that you had a talent for this, or was it something else?
Well, I think that to answer your first question, I think yes. I'm going to add a part two.
Okay.
His philosophy, as well as mine, is that though we all can do it.
Right.
So I will answer yes, but I just feel ethically it's important to add the second part as well.
Sure. I
Mhm.
didn't, I, the way that I took it when you originally said it was that he was just like, yes, you can do this too, and didn't
Yes.
have a sense. And then when I asked the question, all of a sudden I started thinking, well, maybe he knew already. But
Yeah.
it was, when that started flowing, was there what did that feel like? When all of a sudden this information is coming, it seems like it's from a different source.
Well, it is. It was bizarre. It was absolutely bizarre. And then
Hmm.
that experience just compounded over and over again, because around that same time, I was decided to try ballroom dancing, which I had never tried before in my life. Going through a little spontaneous bucket list, shall we say. And as I'm standing on the ballroom floor, and I know nothing about this at all, in a moment of stillness, because I'm waiting for the lead, then this rush of information from another source on my brain's not generating is just flooding through. And then the more that I took these ballroom dance lessons, which were enjoyable in and of themselves, the more that this information that wasn't generated by me kept coming in. And then I started to validate it with the people that it corresponded with, and it ended up being true and helpful. So then everything just compounded from that point forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you think the relationship is between starting ballroom dance and additional flow?
Yes, the relationship is that I was probably, for once since I was probably 3 or 4 years old, actually standing still and quiet, as opposed to doing
Mm.
80 things a minute or whatever, going at a very rapid pace, as is the case when, any of us are employed, but especially in the business world. And at that point in my career, I had quite a bit of responsibility, etc. So instead of trying to process so many things, concurrently, what's happened in that meeting that just ended? What am I doing now? What's going on in the next meeting? Where do I have to be tomorrow? What flight do I have to catch, etc.? I was just standing there waiting for the lead because I didn't know what to do. So as I was absolutely still with nothing else really going on but to wait, then the flood came.
Fascinating.
hmm
Nice.
So I gave it space.
Yeah. 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 Just makes me think of how we don't allow much space in our lives.
No. No. I also credit the two ballroom dance teachers who are not only exceptional in their art and in their craft of both knowing how to be wonderful professionals in their own art of ballroom dancing, and as teachers, but as people, they are two of the most genuine people on the planet that I was so fortunate to meet. And I think that the compassion and the kindness and the acceptance that they exude on a daily basis also made it very easy for me to accept this very bizarre set of information that was coming in.
And so, right now on your journey, how are you incorporating what you've learned about yourself and sharing with people what awarenesses come to you? What does that look like for you?
Well, I would say that to answer that question, I have to give Tina Zion a lot of credit.
Okay.
Because then I started to, because my personality is such that I had to figure out what was happening. And especially because I was a real skeptic that was, trying to actually disprove what was going on, because I just couldn't really believe it. And then the more I tried to disprove it, the more I proved it, actually. So then the more curious I got. And so I was seeking then very reputable mentors in this space, because there's unfortunately a lot of imposters. And so I was very fortunate to find Tina. And to answer that question, then I took all of her courses. Some of her courses I took more than once because they were just so profound. Read all of her books, and actually am still involved with her mentoring today. And through, I would say, her guidance and leadership, what it's like for me today is that this is the happiest chapter of my life,
Nice.
because I get to use all of my skills, whether they are associated with mediumship, mentorship, business, etc. And actually, at the time when I was coming out of high school, and I was not thrilled about working as an X-ray technician at the time, because I wanted to go to college like my friends were going to college. But all that medical training, and I had worked for 8 years in a doctor's office as well, but all that medical training as well, not that I'm a physician, but it all came full circle, because now I'm at a point in my life where I am using all of the skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to answer the question, it's the happiest chapter in my life. It's the most fulfilling, as far as having impact. I mean, I'm very grateful for my corporate career. I worked hard. I was rewarded well. I achieved a lot for the companies and the employers that I had the privilege of working for. This is, though, much more personal at an individual level. And I would say that I also have the opportunity to really customize every session for that particular client in that moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that freedom of delivery is wonderful.
Yeah, I hear that. When you think about, you had mentioned earlier, an imposter, what are some things that you feel like people would benefit from paying attention to if they're stepping into exploring this, whether it's for themselves as, learning more, or for themselves as like a client of someone?
Well, some of the obvious things would be to make sure that you can find references, just like you would check out any other profession as well. I also think that it's not the best indication if you're working with somebody that makes you feel pressured that you must do this, especially if it's you must only eat this, you must only eat that, you must dress this way. Very controlling. I think that those are some red flags about that. Uh, and I think that the biggest part of my role is to make people feel safe. This is a safe, sacred place. And the moment that someone doesn't feel safe in that space, I think is an opportunity for that person to exercise their own intuition that this isn't a right fit. Maybe the person's not necessarily an imposter, but this isn't the right fit.
Yeah, sure, sure.
How do you progress? Or
No, go ahead. I'll remember.
in doing what you do, are there times where you are in and out of touch with source or guides? I don't know how you describe it during a session. And if there are times when you're in and out, how do you know the difference?
Okay, great question. I love it. So I would say that I'm connected all of the time. However, when people ask me a similar question to that, my answer is I make every human effort to not alter the input because it's not for me to alter. So I say sometimes the most bizarre things to people, but when I do that, it typically then resonates. It sounds bizarre to me, but it resonates for the client, and that's what matters. So I don't use my brain to interpret or to modify the information. I do use my brain, we'll say in 3D space, to formulate an English sentence that will be able to be understood by the receiver, the client. So in that way, I'm in 5D connected, getting the information, and I'll use my brain and not for creating the information because I'm not creating it, I'm receiving it, but I will use my brain to then, I guess, solidify the information for delivery, for best delivery to the client so that it is understandable. Because as the information comes into me, it can be a series of pictures, words, phrases, feelings, colors. It can be quite a menagerie of types of input. So if I literally said what I was getting, it would make no sense to most people. Well, what does yellow mean in this concept? What does cow mean? Apple? What does this have to do with anything? But I would call it my energy alphabet, which is how I progressed, to get back to your question, is that I noticed over time as I was doing this work that divine and sacred guidance was starting to set patterns for me. Whenever I give you this particular symbol or phrase or color or whatever, it always was meaning the same thing. Now, of course, the context is very different by person. And to me, that became what I call my energy alphabet, so I could get more information faster.
Right.
For those who may be listening who remember the old days of stenography, shorthand, where there's funny little squiggles, could mean a paragraph. That's an exaggeration, but you get the gist.
Yeah.
So to learn this and to build upon it that is one way, and I call it my personal energy alphabet. I think everybody has one. And then on top of that, the complexity of the type of work kept increasing, which enabled me then to take that guidance that I was getting and to offer more services.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like, Maryann, that there were, other than lots of practice, were there other people or other materials that you felt like were really helpful for you in learning more about yourself and this experience for you?
So I would say, just to go back to finding a couple of really helpful mentors,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
key.
Mm-hmm.
I think to be really ethical and good in this profession, I think you have to work on yourself first
Mm-hmm.
and address we all have issues, baggage, whatever you want to call it, and to make sure that you're addressing that so that doesn't get in the way
Mm-hmm.
of the service that you're trying to provide your client. And I also think that reading, some books and going through some classes where they are really doing role plays and you're allowed to read each other. I mean, obviously with permission.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're not in a formal class setting, the other thing that I did was I would tell people and say, "Can I do this practice reading on you?" So that they would really give me their unabashed, honest feedback
Okay.
as
Okay.
to what I got right and what I didn't get so right. Because it is energy. I call this working with the language of energy. And just like I wouldn't be fluent in Mandarin overnight, I'm not going to be fluent in the language of energy overnight.
Right.
I feel blessed that I was able to adapt to it, from what I understand from my mentors, rather quickly. At the same time, because of the ethics involved and how clients are really hanging on to every word, I feel
Mm-hmm.
it's all the more important in terms of what words you use, not only for the delivery of the service, but because each word has an energy as well.
Mm. Yeah. So you said the language of energy. Would you speak more about that?
Sure. So when I try to explain this seemingly nebulous concept to others, I said, well, we have the human language where we use our voice, and for most of my clients, we're speaking English, but I do work with clients globally who speak other languages as their first language.
Mm-hmm.
I spent 8 years, studying Spanish. So, anytime we're learning a language, we have to figure out the basics. Well, gee, is the alphabet even the same? And then, similar to when we were little kids, we do words and phrases and paragraphs and on and on. Well, it's similar with to me, the language of energy. So at first, when information started to come in, it was more factual, like when that first medium, had me do some practice readings right in front of him. And I got the person and the profession and some of the key points in that person's life. But
Yeah.
just like any language, there's nuance and there's a
Mm-hmm.
wealth of information that's in
Mm-hmm.
that nuance. And
Right.
and so, for example, when I'm getting a feeling that there is something hot going on with this person, is it hot because this person just got done running,
Mm.
out for a run before the session, or is this hot because there is so much anger? So
Mm.
the
Mm-hmm.
nuance can make the world of difference, just like in
Mm.
the English language or in any language. So the
Right.
language of energy, there is so much that can be gained in terms of what is the texture of what you're feeling? What
Mm.
is the composition? Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it vascular? Is it not? Is it flowing? Is it not? Does it have a smooth edge or a raggedy edge? I mean, these are just a plethora of things that flood in. Now, all of that didn't flood in day one, but over
Mm-hmm.
time, just like when we're learning the English language, we get more sophisticated with adjectives and adverbs, and our use of nouns and verbs get more specific to really further accurately describe what's going on, or what do we want the listener or the reader to take
Right.
away. Well, it's similar with the language of energy. So did I answer that question?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 I think, for me, I think of things in terms of energy,
Mm-hmm.
not visually, but
Mm-hmm.
just, I don't know.
It's flowing. It's like oxygen.
Yeah,
It's always around us.
you're right.
Yeah.
Always. And so I think it's just something that I've um, has always been a part of me. But hearing someone say the language of energy is unique to me. And so I was curious what you
Well,
were.
I wanted to make it relatable because
Hmm.
I do believe that everyone can do this. It takes some
Hmm.
practice, but everyone can do it. And I want it to be accessible, not only even if they don't ever want to do it for someone else, just for themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, I really wish that in a way that I had learned this much earlier in life, life might have been a lot easier. But I also understand that there's a divine plan, and that when I had my own awakening, of course, then I also realized I had this plethora of life experiences to draw upon, which makes me
Right.
attractive to corporate clients because
Yeah.
they can see from my my LinkedIn profile and things like that. Oh, she really
Hmm.
has been in the trenches. She really has been there on the front line. So,
Right.
now, of course, again, my retrospective gives a perspective that there's a reason why I went through the stages I went through, and now things have come full circle.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Tell us
Yeah.
about the transition, your knowing around the transition from the corporate world to doing what you do now.
Well, I'll be very blunt. I was scared.
Yeah.
Mm.
um, it's not that I was scared of what I was learning. Actually, I was intrigued, but I wasn't frightened. But what I was scared about was that I'm from a very humble background, and I worked like a lot of people. I worked very, very hard to get out of a socioeconomic setting that wasn't conducive to a college education, and certainly not to a corporate career with the types of positions that I ended up holding. And I had also made my husband and I also had agreed that we were both going to work in our respective corporate jobs until a certain age, and then that was
Mm.
going to be part of a retirement plan, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm married to a wonderful person, and I really also didn't want to, go back on that agreement. And so I was very afraid to walk away from a very hard-earned 33 plus year career in the corporate world that I had really worked hard to, get to that point. And especially because going into this path, there's not really you can think there's a plan, but well, there is a plan, but you may not know what it is yet. and and was going from a six-figure income to zero
Mm.
because it's not like you get a mass of clients overnight,
Right.
and it's a whole different term. It's just a whole different basis as far as dollars.
Hmm.
And so I really had to take a deep breath. And it took me a couple of years actually to do the transition because number one, during that 2 years, I was doing a lot of mentoring, meaning getting mentored.
Sure.
I was doing a lot of training in Tina's courses and some others to really see, well, how proficient am I? Am I supposed to be doing this just for me? Am I supposed to be doing this to help others, to
Hmm.
figure that out?
Hmm.
And so the transition, the more I got into the transition, I would say then the easier it got because,
Hmm.
the further you get away from the dock, if you will, okay, the ship has
Mm.
left the dock. There's really no point in looking back. You're going forward this way. And for a while, I had been worried about what are people going to think? They're going to think Maryann just went nuts.
Hmm.
She had this stellar career. She was really known for being, on her game and, focusing on the facts, et cetera, to this. But that really dissolved because it came down to actually, it was rather humorous because when I started to tell people who had worked with me for quite a while, either they weren't surprised or they might have been surprised, but they cared about me enough that they were like, "Are you happy? Great."
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think
So,
about
and
you.
actually, some of the people that I used to work with actually became clients because
Mm.
they were interested in this, but they never really knew anybody they felt was reputable.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I had
Sure.
I had had a good reputation when I had worked for them, so some of them actually became clients.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that your energy was really clear once you made that choice.
Yeah, yeah. Once you make the choice, I mean, but I want to be, upfront as well. I mean, I was nervous.
Yeah.
It wasn't the easiest thing for me to just walk away
Hmm.
from the known that I had spent decades creating. Uh,
Yeah.
and I have to give a lot of credit to my husband as well, who
Mm.
took it really in stride.
Mm. That's really nice. Yeah.
Hmm.
How do you care for yourself doing this work,
Well,
Maryann?
I would say that to do this work, you have to um, really be mindful of your own health, because what I've really learned is that if I don't take the time to take care of my health, then I can become vulnerable, just like we all can, to anything.
Sure.
But then if I'm not taking care of myself and I'm not at my best, then I don't feel it's ethical for me to do the work, because then I can't be as sure about the clarity in which I am receiving
Hmm. Hmm.
the messages or the information. And then that is not fair to the client.
Yeah. Do you have like a daily routine that you do to care for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I open and close the day every day with my guides, who I'm
Mm.
very grateful for having divine and sacred guides. I do more physical activity now than ever. I still do
Mm.
ballroom dancing, and I compete nationally.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow.
And that's a great way for me to keep, I'll say, all systems clear and moving, shall we say. And of course it helps that I still have the same two teachers that I had when all this was unfolding. And
Mm.
they may not have understood it, but they were very supportive
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. And I would say that I probably have a better diet now too
Mm.
than I had before. I
Yeah.
still enjoy my ice cream, I'm going to confess. I still enjoy my
I
ice
feel you.
cream.
I enjoy it too much.
I still enjoy my ice cream.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some things aren't negotiable. Chocolate and ice cream still
Yeah.
still on the menu.
Oh, when you think about people developing their inner knowing, are there things that come to mind that you feel like you could share, to encourage people?
Yeah, I would say that when you might be hesitant about going to those deep, dark places inside, which we all have,
Hmm.
um, it's so much less scary than you might think. Or even if it is as scary or worse, it's so much better on the other side coming
Mm,
out.
yeah.
That it's worth the journey going in,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you
I,
really do get a lot more clarity for your own life's purpose. I think you also are really able to heal
mhm,
and to move forward. I think it made me anyway more compassionate
mhm.
as well.
Agreed. Yeah.
What's your advice for being able to continue on when you're going into those dark spaces to get through
Um, I think
instead of
that
running away?
yeah, yes, yes. I think my advice would be to tell someone that you trust that you're going in.
Mm,
Just like if you're going on a hike or
yeah.
somewhere, sell some, I also think that it's advisable uh, to work with a professional that can help you explore those places. So you're going in with some guidance. And I also think the third thing is that if you haven't already identified who your divine and sacred guide or guides are, to do that, because then
Mm.
you really do have divine and sacred company.
How would you recommend people go about that?
So if you get quiet, it doesn't have to be in a deep meditative state. But if you allow yourself to get quiet and you ask for the specific name of your guide, keeping in
Mm.
mind that divine and sacred guide, keeping in mind that that name may not be a name you recognize in English.
Okay.
So you may get a name and you may spell it phonetically. and that's fine. And then after you get that name, there is a way, and this is going to be a strong word, but it's intentional. You actually interrogate that guide to make sure that what you have gotten is truly a divine and sacred guide.
Okay.
Anyway, and that's probably could be another conversation in and of itself, probably. But at any rate, you just want to make sure that you are truly getting divine and sacred guidance. But everyone has at least one, if not more, guides that are available to them, and they are extremely helpful.
Interesting. Yeah.
And when you get to a point where you might have several, it's just like even before the days of caller ID, if my husband rang the phone and I answered the phone, I would know it was him without him saying much more than hello, because I know that voice. Well, similarly, your guides have a voice that you recognize. And I'm not saying you have to actually hear it,
Right.
but the sense of that particular guide is specific to the role they're playing for you. So I know when which guide has come in to help for what.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's a wonderful resource, and they really are there to be helpful.
Interesting.
Yeah, I get this over the course of my life, sometimes asking for help and not knowing, who I'm really asking, that sort of stuff. And, many times there's no answer coming across. And I'm sure you run into this in training other people or working with other people. What do you say in those circumstances?
So I would say that there's likely an answer coming across. It's just how do we enable the person to receive it, or to become aware of it, to perceive it. Okay, perceive it. And so one of the first things I do is use a little bit of humor, because when people are stressed, then they vibrate lower, and then it's harder for them to actually receive information. Right. So I'll say, you know what? We're going to get back to that in a second. But in the meantime, I said, just tell me, where's your happy place? Because the first thing I want to do is to get the person to relax. Okay. Because if people are tense, like, I'm not getting it, I'm not getting it, I'm not getting it. Well, then they're vibrating lower and lower and lower. Right. And it's going to be harder and harder for them to connect, because we have to actually raise our vibration to more easily get and receive the information. So I might say something like that to, first of all, get them to relax, or something humorous comes to mind that's in the context of the session that would be well received. We'll use some humor in another way. And then after the person's relaxed, and that usually only takes a couple of minutes, then I'll say, you know what, we're still going to get back to that, but can you tell me what color do you perceive right now? Anything. Just what's the first color that comes to mind? And they don't realize it, but I'm actually starting to help them get the information, because these are pops. Or I'll say, is there any object that comes to your mind right now? Tractor? Great. Doesn't matter what it is, because what I'm starting to help them develop is their energy alphabet.
Right. Yeah. Nice.
And it doesn't matter if tractor means nothing to me. It matters that tractor means a lot to them, but they may not realize it.
Right. Yeah.
Like I had a situation with a gentleman. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I had a situation with a gentleman, and he called and he said, I don't know what's going on. I live alone in my family home that I grew up in, and it's just me now, and everything is fine. The house is secure. I have a security system. And every night when I go to bed, I hear this kind of unusual sound. And it seems like it's coming from a distance, like downstairs in the basement. So I go to the basement. I don't see anything wrong. Nothing's moved. Everything is secure, but I just don't get it. And I said, well, how does that sound make you feel? I said, does it make you feel afraid? And he said, no. He said, it just makes me feel curious. I just want to know what it is. And I said, okay. But see, for first clue, it doesn't make him feel afraid. Okay. And so I said, now he had me on his iPhone anyway. So I said, can you take me to the basement? And so we went to the basement, and what I saw that got my attention was an old workbench that looked like it hadn't been used in quite a number of years. And on the edge of it, and I'm not a carpenter, so I don't know all the tools, but there was this one thing, and it was actually a vise, and it has that little handle on the end that you would spin, and the vise would open and close. I'm sure there's a special name for that handle, but anyway. And so when that got my attention, and I said to him, do me a favor, can you spin that handle on the end of the vise? And he said, okay. And he did, and he went, that's the sound. And I said, who used to work at the workbench? And he said, my dad. And I said, and where were you when you were a little boy, when your dad worked down the basement? And it came out that his father worked hard. He worked 2 jobs, and he basically ran his own little second business, fixing things for people out of the basement. So he would come home from work, have dinner, and then the little boy at the time, who is my client now, would go down to the basement and play while his dad was working. But this was the sound in the
Right.
background that he was hearing a lot. And I said, it's your dad saying hi. And he was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Because it sounds so familiar from his childhood. It didn't make him afraid. He was just curious. And I said, it's just your dad saying hi.
Nice.
Yeah, that is really nice.
You know, and these are like the wonderful things that you just can't make up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Brings comfort and connection and yeah. Yeah. There was another question I was going to ask. When you're with someone, how do you differentiate or discern what's theirs and what might be yours when you're getting downloads? Or
that's great. That's a great question. So let's say I'm working with somebody that is struggling with a work situation, and they're coming to me for mentoring. And as they're describing the work situation, I can really identify with it because I've been through something very similar. Now, it's kind of, to me, it's like there's the pond in the middle, and then there's on the other side of the pond is the client's field, if you will. And on my side of the pond is my field, if you will. So I recognize what's going on, okay, but I'm not going to say that. The good thing is that, oh, I can really identify with this pain or the situation or the struggle or whatever, because I went through something extremely similar. In that example, yay, because it helps to get to a solution a bit faster. However, where I stop with that identification is, but how does it feel to the client? Because how I felt about it in a similar or same situation doesn't necessarily mean that's how my client feels about it or how they're experiencing it. So I would say the connection on the what can be faster as far as, oh, I get that. Okay. And again, part of the energy alphabet, but how to proceed is completely specific to that client.
Okay.
Is that a good way of explaining it?
Yeah. The example that you gave about the pond and you being on this side and them being on that side, is that something that you learned through your training?
No, that came in right now. I never used that example before in my life. That just came on in.
Nice.
So Maryann, as a mental health professional, I mean, I have, people that ask me questions, about mediums, particularly after the loss of someone,
Yes.
close to them.
Yes.
And so it's not something that I really have familiarity with. And so I wonder, if someone was asking about what that experience might be like, for someone, or, what you would recommend in a situation like that. Are there things that come to mind that you think would be helpful for people when they're...
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So the first thing I suggest to people is to try to be as open as possible to whomever comes through from the other side, because while the person may desperately want to connect with, say, their mother or their son, the divine may have a different order in mind.
Mm.
And so, for example, I say, you may not want to hear from Uncle Fred, but Uncle Fred may have something to say that is
Mm.
important and is as a gateway to the others to follow. So, I said, if you become so specific, I only want to hear from a certain particular spirit, it's like threading a needle. And like then all the other doors, you're almost like closing off. I said, I would rather you be open to the plethora of information that comes and let the order in which it comes unfold,
Okay.
because the whatever term makes sense to the client, universe, divine, energy, whatever term resonates, they're a lot smarter than me.
Mm.
There's reasons why they are having certain spirits come through at a certain time. So I asked them to, number one, please be open. Number two is that I ask them to, if I say something and it resonates, great. And if I say something and it really makes no sense, to say that. My goal is to be accurate and not to make things fit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But at the same time, I'll say, if it doesn't fit right now, can you just make a note of it, because it may make sense to you later.
Right.
And I'm not trying to make it fit, but I'm just trying, let's just gather all the information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because sometimes if it doesn't make sense now, it may make sense later.
Sure.
The other thing that I'll often suggest to clients, besides being open to who comes through, is what they have to say. Now, often what comes through is some words of enlightenment, some advice, apologies come through. But there also can be advice that the loved ones from the other side say that the client sitting in front of me may not necessarily want to hear, but I still have to say it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it can sometimes be require quite a bit, I'll say, of compassion and diplomacy. I had a mom and her daughter come, and this was actually in a group setting, and they were sitting actually in front of me, and as I was standing in this doing a gallery reading, and the son came through extremely strongly with so much detail, and the daughter is sitting next to the mom saying, it's him, it's him, it's him, this is great, this is great, this is great. And the mother is like stone faced, like, nope, 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 nope. Now in that situation, because my client is really the spirit crossed over. That's really my client. So I have to honor what I'm being told. At the same time, I certainly can appreciate a bereaved mom. So what I did was, in that setting, is I said, you know what? I said, there's additional information coming through. I said, so I'm just going to relay it, but I'm just going to leave it here. And I just pointed to my feet. So I'm not forcing any one person to take it, even though the daughter in the front row was still like, Tim, this is great, this is great. But the mother wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I still honored the spirit and relayed the information, but I just looked down at my feet, like I'm not forcing it on anyone. And then at the very end of the whole gallery, everybody had left, and I could see the mother and the daughter like off in the corner, and they were obviously waiting for everyone to leave. And the mother came over and she said, that was my son. I just wasn't ready. And I said,
Yeah.
I said, it's okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, while I ask clients to be ready, sometimes they think they're ready. That's why they came to the session.
Right.
But actually in the moment, it may still, and the reason why is because the particular child took his own life, and that still was just so hard, for the mom, that, it was just a self-protective mechanism that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
So anyway, I kind of gave an example that was a little bit more at another extreme, but it still raises the point of, just try to be open to what comes through.
Yeah.
There's a lot of responsibility in what you do, just as far as then learning over time the nuance of how to share.
Yes.
And I just appreciate the professionalism associated with it. It's just really nice to hear.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is really, it really is divine and sacred work. And I really consider it an honor and a privilege,
Mm-hmm.
because people are trusting me. So I really have to do all that I can to make it as at least a good to and fulfilling an experience as possible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Maryann, because that hour always goes by so fast, are there things that you would like to share as we're wrapping up?
Yes. So if you don't mind, I would like to read my mission statement because it really packs a punch.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So my mission statement is only positive energies for the greatest good, highest purpose, optimal healing, comfort, closure, and respect are ever to be in these sessions as associated with divine wisdom. There is respect and not judgment, so all have a voice to be heard and honored. All are accepted to find, live, and stand strong in their truth. Surrender is the strength to seek your greatest potential. Waiting is the cherished patience when the gifts of gratitude and fulfillment await us. We are forever grounded in the trust and knowing that love prevails.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, the word surrender was and waiting were never in my vocabulary.
Understood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had my experience with surrender. So if you were going to share a hope or a mantra with people, what comes to mind?
Well, I would hope that anyone listening to this, that if they took away one thing, it would be to be open to the fact that this thing called energy, the universe being connected, is in fact real. I am the convert. I am the one that was the skeptic, now turned champion. I'm the one that tried to disprove this with, great emphasis and actually failed, because the more I tried to disprove it, the more I proved it. And to be open to the fact that, life can be so much better. And there's another currency in life besides the metrics that I was raised on. There's other currencies of happiness.
Yeah.
And there's other currencies of there really isn't a price you can put on, internal peace. There's not a price you can put on fulfillment. Do I still have bills to pay? Of course I still have bills to pay. But my concern about my life falling apart and me having to go back to my extremely humble beginnings when I was growing up, that fear didn't materialize.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I never would have thought it, in my mid-60s that I'd be competing nationally in ballroom dance. Never would have thought that. Never would have thought I would be a medium and an energy worker. And I'm so glad that I said yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like a lot of fun, Maryann.
Yeah,
Oh, it's a
wonderful
blast.
journey. Goodness sakes. If our listeners or viewers want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So that's my website. So it's intuitiveservicesinsight.com. That's the best way you can reach me. And the email is info@intuitiveservicesinsight.com.
Yeah. And we'll have that information in the podcast description too. So easy for people to just click on it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the best way to reach me. And my website, I made an effort to make it pretty robust. So there's a lot of testimonials, both written and video. There's a lot of information on there because I really wanted it to be as self-explanatory as possible, so that before you sign up for a session, you can see me on video in a lot of different ways to get a feel for what I'm like. I'm pretty much like this.
Yeah. I think it's really nice for people to get a sense of you before they sit down with you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a really strong positive energy too. The minute we came on, it just raised up it raised me up anyway. I can't speak for Theresa, but thank you. Yeah, it's just
thank
lovely.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really nice. Thank you, Maryann. We appreciate you taking this time with us today just to share more about your experience and your knowing, but also the work you're doing.
Well, purely my pleasure. So thank you both for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to explore life with you. We encourage curiosity, self-growth, and we strive to be more compassionate every day.